Hello, and welcome to episode 35 of the Unlimited Opinions podcast. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And as always, we're reading Anthony Kenny's A New History of Western Philosophy. And this episode, we're talking about epistemology.
Watch your mouth.
Yes, of course. Saw that coming. Epistemology, the study of knowledge in the modern era of philosophy. Should we just...
Let's plow into it. Get moving.
All right. So this first section...
Although I would say, I was surprisingly interested in this subject. I mean, this chapter I thought was well written and a lot of interesting thoughts from these philosophers.
Yes, this was much better than I think any of the past epistemology sections.
I agree.
Because I think in the past we get really bogged down into, well, how do we know this? And this is much different, I think.
Yes.
So we start off with John Stuart Mill. Who was an empiricist, so he believed that all knowledge comes from experience. So anything you know, you kind of have to experience it first. Mm-hmm. And so with this, he was kind of attacking the idea that, these mathematical principles were something that were just kind of inherent.
Right. Pre-existed.
Yes, a priori.
A priori.
A priori.
That's
sure.
how I say it.
A priori. Same thing. From the beginning. He really believed that these sorts of beliefs, that these are kind of just constant... this kind of leads to these false doctrines and bad institutions because you're saying, well, this is even bigger than humanity. So if I know this, I must be so and so important and that sort of thing.
True. Delusions of grandeur.
Yes, exactly. Then we also talk about John Henry Newman. He really kind of took this a little bit farther. He believed that it was superstition that we have faculties for direct knowledge of immaterial things. Yeah. So it's kind of taking that whole, this is a false doctrine, even further saying, well, that's just kind of ridiculous. We don't just have this knowledge of these things. We do have to learn this through experience. This isn't just this forever truth of mathematics.
Yeah, I like that, using that term superstition. Mm-hmm. I thought characterizing those kind of theories that there is some sort of pre-existing, pre-truth or something that you're born with or is out there maybe for you to discover, that is as opposed just through reason or thought.
It kind of goes back to what we were talking about last episode too, where they're kind of realizing truth isn't just this object. Right. It's a description that's applied to things. It's true or it isn't. Right. That sort of thing.
That's right. Good. Yes.
And so John Henry Newman also kind of goes on to describe the role of reason. So I'm going to read this section here on page 866.
It's kind of funny. I'm interrupting you again, but they're referring him to him as John Henry Newman, but he's really Cardinal Newman. Mm-hmm. Interesting history of the guy too. Did we go through that in the beginning of this?
Mm-hmm. We did.
He was an Anglican and he converted to Catholicism and all that.
Yes, because I remember pointing out that he was the Newman of the Newman Centers at colleges.
Yes,
you didn't make that connection. So
right. Okay. All right. I want to make sure that we covered all that stuff. I have newfound respect for the guy. I didn't really know much about him.
It's really interesting.
Yes.
And he says, "Now reason is that faculty of mind by which this deficiency of the senses is supplied, by which knowledge of things external to us, of beings, facts, and events, is attained beyond the range of sense. It ascertains for us not natural things only, or immaterial only, or present only, or past or future, but even if limited in its power, it is unlimited in its range. It reaches to the ends of the universe and to the throne of God beyond them. It brings us knowledge, whether real or uncertain, still knowledge, in whatever degree of perfection, from every side, but at the same time with this characteristic that it obtains it indirectly, not directly." Yeah. So I think that was just a really kind of poetic, I guess, way of saying what reason is. It's kind of how we really reach out from just what we perceive, and it's really limitless in how we try to apply it to basically everything. And this reason is really this very prime role within humanity as a whole. Right.
And I always like the rational arguments for religious beliefs. And I think that... Jesus was an underappreciated philosopher, and of course he's not even mentioned anywhere in this book. Yeah. But I guess he's considered a religious figure as opposed to a philosopher. But just especially how he uses analogies and stories and all that, parables and all that stuff to get across a point, and how he kind of talks a little bit in riddles. But I was thinking during this that. To your point, several episodes ago, I thought you mentioned this. Maybe you just mentioned it to me, but that you were kind of disappointed in your Catholic education, because there was no apologetics. There's no discussion of why.
We brought this up, I think, several times on the podcast.
Right, and I think I think that is missing. From you don't have to have it like in third grade or whatever, but certainly in high school, because it doesn't have to even be denominational, but at least have, like, there's a really good book, The Case for Christ, which is kind of like just a legal and factual based argument that number one, Jesus existed, which is really accepted by everybody. He was a
basically nobody the respected person believes that Jesus did not exist.
Right. There was a guy named Jesus, and he was a religious figure, and then some people say he was like a cult figure, or a dude that had these followers. But there's an interesting argument to be made about the historical documents about this movement and how it spread and all that stuff, and there's just not enough of that, I think. And I think reading a little bit more, I have to read more about Cardinal Newman and his life and his books and stuff. I have like 10 half-started books now, so I have not ordered anything from him, but I was thinking that during this, because he makes such good arguments about epistemology, about the role of reason and inquiry.
Yeah.
Just and it's kind of funny to have somebody that's a cardinal in the Catholic Church that is saying these things, and it's almost blasphemous where he's saying that reason and knowledge of the mind can go to the throne of God and beyond the throne. So I wonder if he got some flack for that.
Oh, I'm sure he did. But kind of going back to your point about the religious education thing, I think especially for people who went through Catholic grade school as well, nothing really changes from what you learn in Catholic grade school to Catholic high school.
Right.
And I mean, at some point, it was 11 years of me basically learning the same thing over and over again. Should evolve with how you progress in life.
And we've talked about that. I guess what the last thing I'd say is that there's just not enough people that know it well enough to teach it.
Yeah, that's true.
Within the church itself.
Yes.
All right,
moving along. Newman also says that there are two different operations of reason. He believes that there is inference from premises and assent to a conclusion. So basically, looking at the things around you, figuring out, where you go from there, and then actually assenting to what you have found out from your senses, agreeing to that.
And don't you think his explanation of this, the language he uses, and the terms he uses, I think this is the best description of clinical reasoning in this book.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Because it's it's really just two steps. He says you perceive the thing and you make an inference from that.
Right.
And then you assent to your inference.
You study it and then you assent to a conclusion, basically.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But he also says that you can assent to things without evidence, and this ascension can be legitimate and frequently is.
Right.
And it kind of points to the example of, I never see London every day. I have no knowledge myself that London keeps existing every day.
Right.
But I just can kind of assent to the fact that it is, that people are still there and they keep on going and it keeps happening as it did yesterday. And you don't have to prove that necessarily with, all these logical, basically puzzles, as previous philosophers have tried to do and that sort of thing. You can just kind of say, well, yeah, it was there yesterday, it can be there tomorrow.
Right. He seems like the most, oddly, the most practical of all these philosophers we've been reading about. And he's a cardinal. He's a religious figure. Not he's a religious figure, but he's part of a church, I guess I'd say.
And he also kind of goes into just a little bit more like the language describing these ascensions. He believes that there is a simple assent, which can be unconscious or rash, which is sort of what I was talking about. That simple assent that London still exists. That's a sort of an unconscious thing that we assent to. And there are certitudes, and certitudes follow on proof. They are accompanied by intellectual contentment and are irreversible. So it's kind of, that further proof of, looking at all this evidence, that is a certitude that I have assented to this. This is just a fact that I have found to be true. And he also believes that our sense of certitude can be wrong. Sometimes I do come to the incorrect conclusion, but that doesn't mean that I should never trust my sense of certitude. These previous philosophers, well, how do you know you're always right about this? And he's like, well, I'm right these other times. I might not be right this time, but that doesn't mean I should never trust the sense. It's not something that is reasonable to say.
Right, and you become non-functional if you just refuse to agree that you could be right about stuff.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Because you're wrong about something else. And he talks about the difference between certainty and infallibility.
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody's saying you're infallible, but some of the things that you believe are just accurately true.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right. Even if you've been wrong before,
mm-hmm.
and you'll be wrong again in the future.
But that doesn't mean that you should stop trying to figure things out.
Right. Right.
It's kind of the whole point.
Yeah. I like that long quote. I don't know if you're going to read it on 868, where he's talking about the argument of reductio ad absurdum, mm-hmm. of this whole theory of that you have to know everything, mm-hmm. or whatever, and he's like, well, there's some things you just will never know.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
We laugh to scorn the idea that we have no parents, that we have no memory of our birth, that we shall never depart this life, that we can have no experience of the future, that we are able to live without food, though we have never tried, that a world of men did not live before our time, or that the world has no history, that there has been no rise and fall of states, no great men, no wars, no revelations, no art, no science, no literature, no religion. Because we have to have some assumptions,
mm-hmm.
So we have to base it upon the knowledge that we have. And that was just really a good point where he's talking about, well, you don't really you don't remember being born. You don't know all these things, but through personal experience. So there has to be a building, a construct, over time of the knowledge base, and you just have to accept it, because otherwise you know nothing. And
mm-hmm.
what's the point?
It's kind of, again, I think we were talking about this last episode, the whole, well, what if my blue is different from your blue?
Right.
It's like, well, does it really matter?
Right.
We just both have to agree that we are talking about the same thing, and
right.
let's just move on.
Right.
I think that's, he was definitely one of my favorite in this section.
Yes.
Are you ready to move on to Pierce? Or
I
do you have anything
guess.
else to say about Newman?
I like Newman.
Yeah, it was really good. Yes. So Pierce on the methods of science.
No, I'm going to hang out at the Newman Center.
So Pierce really kind of adopted this belief from Descartes that inquiry originates in doubt and ends in belief. So that's really what is our driving passion to figure things out, is we doubt something, and then we end this process of searching by believing something. And he believed that there were 4 methods to fix our beliefs, and I thought these 4 were really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the first was tenacity, which is only dwelling on what supports our belief and turning away from what disturbs it. So basically, if this newspaper says something, presents this piece of evidence that doesn't support what I personally believe, I'll just ignore that. And I'll only look for things that really confirm what I already believe. And I think that's something that's really common today, is people just ignoring the other side.
True.
Then he also believes, kind of going off of this tenacity, that you really can't have this tenacity forever without authority. And authority is the second method, which is that an institution keeps the correct doctrines at the attention of the people. So it's not even you just ignoring these other things, but it's, the government or the people in power really just kind of only presenting one side of things to support the beliefs that are, beneficial to those in power.
Yeah, like the CDC.
Yes, exactly.
So that's, or the National Institutes of Health, or Dr. Fauci.
Yes.
That despicable troll.
So then the third method he believes was better than the previous 2, but not the best, and that is a priori, or a priori. Is that how you say it?
I say a priori.
A priori?
And he's talking about meditation, where you just sit in a room and think about it. And
with the goal
of get to some truth.
The goal of creating a universally valid metaphysics. So basically a system that works for everything, which he believes, that's kind of impossible to realistically achieve.
Correct.
And then he believes the best way is through science. That is this 4th method. To perceive and reason about a world outside our own minds, to look around, to use our senses, create these hypotheses, and then try to prove them wrong or right. And that's the best way to reach knowledge, essentially.
Yes. And this quote, I think, says it all. The task of logic is to provide us with the guiding principles to enable us to find out, on the basis of what we know, something that we do not know, and thus to approximate ever more closely to this ultimate reality. I think that's it.
Yeah.
As far as logic and reasoning and the scientific method, I thought that was just very concise.
Yeah, I agree.
The description of it.
Because it even says, we won't always, get exactly the right answer.
Right.
We're getting closer to the
and
truth,
closer
and that is
over
what we
time.
should always be striving to achieve.
We're trying to get closer, but our current bloated so-called scientific community is now counterproductive. We're politicizing everything.
Yes.
And they come to their conclusions. And let's find the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Christ. There's global warming. The polar bears are dying. Which, by the way, why do I give a rat's ass if polar bears are dying? But, I mean, they seem cuddly, but they will eat you.
Yes.
Literally eat you.
Yes.
But I digress. There may be some global warming alarmists in our audience.
We've lost our listener.
Damn it.
Unfortunate. So Peirce was, of course, a pragmatist. And pragmatism, he kind of defines it as considering what effects have practical bearing to our conception of reality. So they're kind of looking around and seeing, what's practical for me to know, how do we best get this practical use of knowledge?
Right.
And he really believed that best method is through science, really discovering these things for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything else to add about Peirce?
Nah.
All right, moving on to Frege.
Yeah, he loves this guy. He goes on and on and on. Like, just like he was going on and on about Kant. I can tell those are they must be like his favorite guys.
Probably. Definitely Kant for sure.
Because I think Frege is he's already said all this stuff once, hasn't he? What else do you get out of Frege on the epistemology?
Well, one of his big things was that justification for a proposition must use the same method as the proposition. So what he's saying is, he kind of looks at... You look very confused.
No, I just almost had to either sneeze or yawn. And I did neither.
It's fantastic.
That was a bizarre feeling.
So
I'm not sure what was going on there.
So what Frege is kind of saying here is, if you have this proposition, say it's like something scientific, you think this reaction will occur for this thing. You can't use the reasoning for that proposition to be, well, there's this metaphysical thing that enables this to happen. You have to use a scientific method to prove a scientific proposition. You have to use a metaphysical method to prove a metaphysical proposition, that sort of thing.
Okay.
You're not too impressed with that one?
No, I don't know. Have I expressed any interest in what this guy says?
No, not at all.
Okay, I was thinking. I don't remember being impressed with this guy at all. But I must be missing something. I don't know. He seems like they talk a lot about it.
Well, he's very Platonic. He goes back to the Platonic ideals, which I know are your favorite.
Right.
So he also believed that mathematics was not a matter of our sensations and ideas. He kind of goes back to that a priori kind of belief that mathematics is this universal thing.
Right.
And he also believed that there was a separate interior private world and an exterior public world. And so this difference between, what we think and what we say, how we actually present these thoughts to the people around us. And so with that, you have this sense of the ego, which is kind of this non-ideal object of thought. Basically what is coming up with these ideas within our own private world. And he kind of goes this is very similar to Descartes' idea of the ego, but he kind of proves it in a different way, where Descartes said, well, there must be something producing these thoughts, therefore there's this ego.
Right.
Frege kind of reverses it. He says, if there is a thought, that thought has to impact something, has to have an effect on something. And so that's something, that object of thought, therefore, is the ego. It's not necessarily so much the thing creating those thoughts, but it is what those thoughts are having an effect on. That is the ego.
Right. It doesn't seem like they're overthinking this.
Probably.
I mean, it just seems like, why do you have to have two separate things? Why isn't it just the same thing?
Well, there's a third thing.
Yes, and no, because once you have two things, you have to join them up into one. Somehow they have to have some sort of union, and so...
So he comes up with this third reality of objective thought, which is where kind of the ego exists and these mathematical ideas exist, these kind of things that are neither part of your own thoughts and the world around you.
Didn't Descartes have like a divine...
he kind of pointed to God was kind of that third world.
Yeah, the divinity and this,
and it all goes back to
being or whatever is in between the two, the physical and the ego or whatever.
And it all goes back to Plato essentially. These are the ideas of these things, these ideal objects that don't really exist, but this is where we get our thoughts of them.
Right.
And this is how we have our idea of them out in the world.
And we just try to understand those things that already did exist, their forms. And
yes.
Yeah.
So you're not a big fan of Frege.
No, I'm not. I mean, and I think Mr. Kenny probably does him some disservice by going into too much detail in it.
Yeah.
Just boring the hell out of me. I'm sure Mr. Kenny is disappointed.
Yeah, I'm sure you're his exact target audience. He was really hoping to please you with this book. So moving on.
Maybe he's our listener.
Maybe he is.
He's our listener.
I know he is. I looked him up at one point.
He's still alive, yeah.
Yeah, he is English. He's British.
Yes.
We do have a couple.
He's knighted, isn't he? Isn't he a Sir Kenny?
Yeah, Sir Anthony Kenny.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
What were you saying?
I was going to say, we do have some downloads every once in a while from the UK.
Right.
Very highly doubt that it is Anthony Kenny himself listening to a podcast of a teenage boy and his dad talking about his book.
If you wrote a book, when was this book?
This wasn't.
It was the first
too
edition.
Long ago. 2007, maybe.
Yeah. So if you're a guy who devoted his life to the study of this topic, it was first published in 2007, and then 2008, and this one's from 2010. I don't know if you'd be entertained or if you'd be mortified by two amateur knuckleheads in Festus, Missouri.
Completely unqualified to talk about any of this.
Criticizing your writing style and your descriptions of these philosophers they don't even understand.
Well, if I were him, I'd ask for a guest spot.
Yeah. Well, if he's listening.
Hey, if he's listening, or if anybody...
I will consider the request.
If anybody listening has Anthony Kenny's contact information...
Don't
tell him.
Yeah, don't tell him about us.
Yeah. Do not give our podcast to him.
Because he probably send us like a cease and desist letter. Stop using my book, Val. You stole all my ideas.
Moving on to Bertrand Russell. So Bertrand Russell believed in this systematic doubt, which is kind of similar to what I was saying about Frege, in that all of our inquiry starts in doubt, and we kind of go through this process of doubting things and then really striving to find this belief.
Right.
And then he also kind of went into this idea of the senses, and that things are immediately known in sensation, and sensation is the action of kind of immediately grasping data. And so with this idea of this sensation, he kind of goes on to say that there's really no proof that life isn't just a dream. Who's to say that our sensation is just something that's being completely made up, that sort of thing. But he says, well, we don't really care if it's all a dream, because our belief in the world is just instinctive. It's kind of that immediate grasp of the world around us in sensation that kind of leads us to believe in this external world. We don't have to prove that this external world exists. We just know that, and there's no reason to go any further with that.
Right. It's you've seen the movie The Matrix, haven't you?
I have not.
Oh my goodness. Oh, then what I was going to say has no meaning to you.
Oh, I know the premise of The Matrix.
Yeah, well, but the premise doesn't do it justice. So the premise is that there is computer overlords that are basically farming humans. Mm-hmm. And keeping them in some sort of computer-generated dream state, basically. And one of the characters, I won't tell you who, because I don't remember any of their names. I think it was in the first episode.
First movie?
Yeah, first movie. What is
first episode?
What's the difference? All right, anywho. Decides he wants to go back because the real life and real world is just kind of brutish and icky and ugly and smelly, and decides he wants to just go back into the Matrix. Mm-hmm. And it makes that choice. But then the question is, if you're in the Matrix and it's just as real to you as reality, what difference does it make?
Yeah.
Is it really a difference? I'm frightened by the thought of the Matrix, and I would much rather have a very unpleasant real life than to have a very nice dream life. Yeah. Although I say that now because my life is generally pretty good.
Well, it kind of goes back to Loki, the show that we watched, the Disney show about Loki. Very big spoilers for Loki, so if you don't want to listen, skip ahead a little bit. But in the final episode...
Mr. Kenny just shut it off.
Yeah, he's very, very much looking forward to watching Loki on Disney+.
Yes.
So Loki and his female variant of Loki have to make a choice. They either have to basically live without free will, knowing that there's somebody pulling the strings behind everything, but be safe from this, very big danger that it will basically destroy everything, or get rid of this person who's pulling all the strings and be in complete and total danger from this invading force, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Would you rather live basically live knowing that somebody is controlling everything you do but be safe, or, you know, live with a sense of freedom but knowing that there's this big danger that is going to destroy everything, basically?
Well, it's also more complicated than that because
That's a very big simplification.
Well, because there are also multiple variations of the same person or same soul or whatever being, and so there's a way that these people or whatever can travel through time, and so it's like all those time travel type issues. If you can travel back in time and you kill yourself, do you still exist?
Yeah.
You know, can you exist in a parallel life at the same time? And how does, you know, can you affect who you are, who you were, who you would become? Yeah. And all these things, you know, it's all the Back to the Future stuff, or someone's story about going back into time and somebody stepped on a butterfly and then everything was different when they got back. I forget the name of that book, but
I don't know.
Yeah, so it's all well and good, but I don't know. I get tired of you know, talking about, well, what if it's just a dream state and this and that, and it's just like, okay, well, you know, it's interesting, you know, to have a talk like that, but it's not. I just need some more practical application. And I think that's kind of what he's saying. Is
like,
you know,
well, we just know that it's instinctive,
right?
And that's kind of where he goes.
I don't think that's a very good argument against it, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, he kind of goes into this description of knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description. So with this knowledge by acquaintance, it's basically anything that we have immediate knowledge of. So, you know, I can look at that dresser there and tell that it is black. But he kind of makes the argument, you know, even though I see this black shape here, you know, there's really no proof that is actually a dresser. You know, I have no way of knowing that is a dresser, and that's where he kind of goes into this knowledge of description.
Right.
You know, I see all of these things, and I recognize that it is real. You know, that is this knowledge of description. You know, I can put all these things together and recognize that is a dresser and it is real based on my immediate knowledge of all these descriptions of it.
But you know it's real. It's not an image. I wasn't as interested in his stuff.
I see what you mean.
In epistemology.
Moving on to Husserl. Husserl's epic.
Husserl's? I don't know how to say his name.
I think it's Husserl.
All right.
So he believed that epistemology is prior to all other philosophical concepts. So basically we have to determine what we know in order to talk about anything else.
Mm-hmm. What we know and the limits of what we can know?
Yes.
Yes.
And so you believe that with this epistemology, we have two things that we are certain of. We are certain of our own mental state, basically that ego, essentially, you know, I exist because I can think these things. And language. We're certain that language exists because that's how I express my thoughts, and language is kind of beyond me. It's not just something that I know, but it is shared by everyone.
Right.
So therefore, there has to be this other thing out here that is language, how I express my thoughts from my own personal mental state.
Is he the guy that goes into the transcendental consciousness BS?
Yeah, because he believes that consciousness can basically exist without the world. It is transcendental. You know, if the world ceased to exist, my consciousness still could exist because I'm not necessarily dependent on the world. You know, my own mind, you know, it's kind of that same thing. You know, how do we know it's not a dream? You know, if I woke up from the dream and everything ceased to exist, my mind would still be there. And so that's how he says, you know, well, that's why it's transcendental. It's not tied to the world. All right, that's all the commentary for that one.
Yeah, I'm just grunting and making guttural noises at this point.
That's very nice.
Podcast.
Sure, our listeners are loving that.
Yeah.
Our listener is loving it.
Our listeners is nodding along. That's what he's doing.
Grunting along with you.
Yeah.
Moving on to Wittgenstein on certainty. So this is kind of where he goes into a very practical application of, you know, determining what we should know. He said that
first, doubt needs grounds. You have to have grounds for your doubts.
Yes.
You can't just doubt everything.
Yes.
You have a reason to doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
And then a genuine doubt must make the difference in someone's behavior.
Mm-hmm. I figured you would absolutely agree with every word this guy was saying.
That's right.
You know, why should I care? What impact does it make? The two big questions.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a reason to doubt it, as opposed to just, well, I'm just going to question everything, man.
And he kind of goes,
shut up, hippie.
And he goes back to this Cartesian doubt, basically the idea of, how do I know that the world exists? If I can only prove that my own thoughts exist. Well, he says that Cartesian doubt destroys itself because it must doubt the very meaning of the words that express it.
Right.
So if I can deny all of reality, I have to deny that I even know what the word deny means.
Right.
So kind of going back to that
Or
language.
reality.
Yeah. Language is,
Right.
Beyond us. Language depends on these other people. Therefore,
Correct.
these other people must exist. The world must exist. If I'm talking about anything at all, if I'm trying to doubt anything at all, I have to doubt language itself exists, thereby
Yes.
destroying the whole argument.
And I love this quote where Kenny's describing it. When we first begin to believe anything, we believe not a single proposition, but a whole system.
Mm-hmm.
Light dawns gradually over the whole.
Yes.
So it's just like the sunrise in the morning. It doesn't just pop on. It's not like turning on a switch. It's gradual. It's a dead of dark at night, and it just kind of, the light comes from everywhere. And I think that's a great description for how you get knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
and how we all get knowledge, and how it develops over time, as a community and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Absolutely.
All right, good.
And Wittgenstein also kind of says that the world picture is not learned by experience. So by that he kind of means, our inherent understanding
Right.
that reality exists isn't something that we have to, prove through this experience.
You don't have to experience everything.
Yeah, it is just this inherited background, basically, of reality
Right.
against which we distinguish true and false.
Right. And I think that ties back into, that this language existed before us,
Mm-hmm.
which helps prove that it is not just a dream of ours,
Yeah.
a creation of ours,
Mhm.
because it comes from something else, something outside of us.
Yes.
The culture in which we were born, the humans that came before us
Mhm.
and communicated all this and learned over time all these different
Yeah.
things that we inherited.
And he kind of describes this. I'm just going to read this quote here.
Okay.
He says, "It is quite sure that motor cars don't grow out of the earth. We feel
True.
that if someone could believe the contrary, he could believe everything we say is untrue and could
Mhm.
question everything that we hold to be sure.
Right.
But how does this one belief hang together with all the rest? We would like to say that someone who could believe that does not accept our whole system of verification. The system is something that a human being acquires by means of observation and instruction. I intentionally do not say learns." So he
Yes.
basically says, we observe the world, we understand that the world exists. We don't have to learn that the world exists. We don't have to prove that the world exists.
Right.
Just by existing within it, hearing the language of other people, seeing it for ourselves,
Mhm.
that should be proof enough. Stop
Right.
trying to tell me that the world does not exist.
Right. Or that you came up with a new proof that exists. I don't care. I don't care what your new thing is.
Yes.
I think, therefore I am. Okay, fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's brilliant.
Stop doubting everything.
Right.
If you're doubting everything that I say, then what's the point?
Yeah, piss off, hippie.
Yeah. to sum up Wittgenstein, that is his whole philosophy. My God.
Go smoke another bong. Surf something. Go out in the waves or something. I don't know. Quit bothering me. I got other things to worry about.
All right. Well, that was all the philosophers for this section of epistemology.
Yeah, I thought it was great, and I really do need to read up on Cardinal Newman.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be doing that.
I think him and Wittgenstein were definitely
Yes,
the two highlights
Yeah.
of this chapter.
but what's Wittgenstein? Is he a German?
Yeah.
So if I read any of his to really understand it, I'd have to learn German and then read it. I mean, I could read a translation, but my lazy side of me is going to be reading Cardinal Newman because he's English.
Yes, that's true.
Well, I like how his story was he started as an Anglican
Mm-hmm.
priest or minister or whatever they are,
Yeah.
and then converted. And started studying heretics. Did you know that? Is that
I
in
think
the
we might have
book?
talked about that.
Did we? Oh, okay. I don't know if I read that somewhere. I thought I read that somewhere
Well,
else.
feel free to share with us.
Well, he was studying heretics and how to prove that the heresies were false.
Mm-hmm.
And then as he studied it, he questioned whether whether the Anglican religion was the true Christian faith, and ended up converting to Catholicism.
Good for him. And then he became a cardinal.
Yes, eventually. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And a saint.
And is he
Recently.
Really? I didn't even know that.
Like a couple of years ago.
Huh. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're giving those things out like candy.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe one day you'll be a saint.
I doubt it.
You
I
doubt
doubt
it?
But I'm gonna. Yeah, I think the hard part is going to be coming up with those 3 miracles because you have to come up with 3 miracles.
Well, that didn't stop quite a few of them from becoming saints.
That's true. That's true. Now, if I get murdered for my faith, I think I'm an automatic saint or a martyr.
You're a martyr.
You know,
Yes.
martyr. But isn't that a saint? Isn't that a form of sainthood?
Yes, it's a form of sainthood. Well, we all become. If we go to heaven, the church says we all become saints. There's just a difference between capital
that's
S
cheap.
saints and
That's
lowercase
cheap.
s saints.
I think you have to. I think you have to get some shit done here first. And I think those. I don't view sainthood as a participation trophy. You know, I mean, of course, not everybody goes to heaven, so I guess there's that. But for everybody that goes to heaven should be considered a saint.
Yes,
there's some people that did more. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, if we go way back to the ancients, it's the whole, how far are you below water or above water, that whole thing,
Well, true, and I don't think it matters to God.
Well, yes,
but because God's like, I love all my children equally. Jerks.
Yes,
but it matters to me.
Yes.
By categorizing them here,
Yes,
I think probably the only way I would be a saint, by the way I live and all that stuff, is if somehow somebody was going to persecute me because of my faith, and I just gave them 2 middle fingers and they cut off my head, which is probably the most likely way I'd be.
Did you see that in your recent future?
In my recent future? No.
Your near future.
My recent future. Recent means past.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, that's a bad choice of
that
words on
term.
my
I
part.
like
Recent
that
future.
term.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
We should make a movie. It's called
Recent
my
Future?
Recent Future.
What would the movie be about?
Time traveling philosophers.
Oh God.
Did you ever see Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure?
Nope.
Also a time travel thing. Gosh, we got to see that one too. You haven't seen The Matrix either. That has really neat visual stuff.
Yeah.
Bill and Ted's both of them Keanu Reeves movies.
Yeah, they are.
The worst actor.
Keanu Reeves?
Yes.
You don't like Keanu Reeves?
I liked Keanu Reeves, but he's terrible.
Really?
There's my imitation of Keanu Reeves acting. I'm Keanu Reeves. I'm an actor.
That wasn't
That sounds
funny.
like him in every movie. Although he's great in John Wick.
Yeah, this guy's about to say he's really good in John Wick.
Yeah, you know why?
Why?
Because he doesn't have to act. He's just looking stern the whole time.
I
You
mean,
want to see the worst acting in the world? Get the movie Speed with Sandra Bullock, which is, by the way, the dumbest movie premise.
yeah, that's where they can't slow down the bus or else it
Yes.
explodes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's pretty easy to figure out a way to drive a certain speed, but whatever. They're going down side streets and stuff, and they didn't. There's no way it stayed above 55 miles per hour. But anyway, I'll get off that rant.
Is that season 2 of Unlimited Opinions? You just giving your critiques of movies?
We could have a movie thing like philosophy in movies.
I guess we could. I don't know. We'll have to see.
We'll have to figure out what we're gonna do.
Or how about we get some ideas from our listeners? Because we're nearing. We're actually. I guess I should talk about what we're doing. We're backlogging episodes right now because I'll be.
We shouldn't tell people that.
Well,
they should be fresh.
Okay. Because I'll be leaving for college in a couple weeks, and we have more than a couple episodes left to do. So we
have 6 more after this.
Yes. So we're recording one right after we finish recording this tonight.
Right.
So we're very closely approaching season 2. So if you have any ideas for what we should do for season 2, you can tweet at us at capital U, lowercase LMTD, opinions with a capital O.
I think for my interests and my passions, I would think entertainment / politics and philosophy, or political thought, political philosophy. But the entertainment aspect was pretty good.
We should probably stick with some sort of book or something at least to guide us a little bit.
Like a formatted.
Yeah.
But maybe not as structured. Like we're I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see.
That's true. That's not a bad idea. But I don't know what book we would do. But we could talk about that in a future episode. Yes. We're kind of getting bogged down.
We are. All right.
We also didn't mention anything about Tolkien today.
Oh, we didn't. Oh, it's disappointing.
Well, I just did. So.
No, you just did. Yeah. I'm trying to think how I can tie Tolkien into epistemology. I don't know.
Well, when Gandalf fought the Balrog.
Yes.
And then he died but didn't die, or maybe he died.
No, he died.
It was reincarnated or whatever.
Essentially.
But then he's like, he seems to have, that character seems to have knowledge beyond the world or beyond time or something.
Yes.
Or maybe he's just so old he experienced everything. But then he came back and he didn't even know his name. You know, like they said Gandalf. Oh.
Well, that's not his given name. Because that's just his name in the language of the hobbits, basically. The hobbits and some of the men.
Right.
And so his real name is, I can't remember it off the top of my head. But, you know, he's essentially kind of a demigod sort of angel in the scheme of the Lord of the Rings, because there's two levels of gods, basically. You have your big old hierarchy, kind of like the Greek myths, think your pantheon. And then you have your lesser gods, which are, you know, some of these other sort of deities, and Sauron is one of them.
Sauron is what?
One of those lesser gods.
Oh.
And so...
okay. Who's the greatest god?
There is one big creator guy, Eru Ilúvatar, who basically created all of these other gods, and then there are 12? Valar. Yes.
Right. Well, we've all become bored to tears already on this subject, but
back to what I was saying about Gandalf.
Yes.
He died when he fought the Balrog, and so he went to Eru Ilúvatar, the big god, and he was sent back basically to kind of replace Saruman, because Saruman is another one of those level of gods. There were 5 of them specifically that were the wizards, and Gandalf kind of replaced him as the head of the order, essentially.
I see.
Yes.
Yeah. So my point was the limits of knowledge. That even when he came back, he forgot his name.
Yes.
And he seems to have like an understanding or kind of a feel for what might happen in the future, but he doesn't know the future.
He quite literally met God, so...
Yeah, so what?
So, I mean, I'm sure God would have told him something.
Really?
Well, he comes back and he says, you know... Well, the whole point he came back was because his mission wasn't done yet. These 5 wizards, these Istari, which is their name in the whatever language.
Isn't that the premise of the movie Heaven Can Wait?
I do not
starring, that one guy who used to cheat on everybody. What's his name? He was also in Dick Tracy. I think he married or he dated Madonna for a while.
No clue. But what I was saying is these 5 wizards, their goal was to combat. He
goes to heaven. And whatever reason, he got sent back down because heaven can wait, and he had to do something.
Yeah.
Yes.
So basically, their whole goal was to defeat Sauron. And, you know, when Saruman fell, he turned to Sauron's side, essentially. Then, you know, Gandalf's mission wasn't completed, so he's sent back as essentially a replacement to Sauron.
Why didn't the Uber god just kill Sauron?
Well, that's a whole nother thing, because
he's already meddling. He's putting this guy back in the game after the Balrog killed him. Why doesn't it just lightning bolt the bad guy?
Well, because there's this whole thing, because the original reason they had to send even the 5 wizards, because the main gods weren't even involved in the world anymore, because, you know, when this island had collapsed into the ocean, the place where the gods lived was completely separated from the physical world, and so they didn't want to impact the physical world anymore.
Seems like a cheap excuse.
Yeah, it's not. But okay. That was way too much Tolkien talk for this episode. We lost everybody on that one.
We tried to work that in.
Yes. And we didn't.
Yeah, I thought we did.
Okay.
The limits of knowledge.
Yes.
The extent of Gandalf's knowledge of his own name.
All right. Well, this has been episode 35 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
Time to record another one. Metaphysics. Get ready.
I don't really like metaphysics, but
really?
we'll
talk
hear about that the next
We'll talk about it anyway. Be prepared.